The City of Toronto's homeless shelters can't take more people in. This is news that John Tory, the mayor of Toronto, shared with Canadians a few short weeks ago, and he attributed a large portion of this concern to the fact that Justin Trudeau has a new policy which allows people to illegally enter Canada from safe spaces like upstate New York and then claim asylum in Canada. And because this is happening in Quebec, his policy is basically to put people on buses and ship them to Ontario. Now, of course, people are going to end up in Toronto, and Justin Trudeau's plan has basically been to bus people somewhere and hope that the provinces will take care of them. Now, what was particularly concerning, outside of this complete non-compassion for human beings in this process, is that we found out that over 800 people who haven't been able to be sheltered by the traditional homeless shelter system in Toronto have been temporarily put in college dormitories in the Greater Toronto area. Now, on August the 9th, those 800 people will face eviction because students have to go back to school, and those are spaces for students. So I forced emergency meetings in the summer of the Citizenship and Immigration Committee. This is a standing committee of the House of Commons because I wanted some answers. My party wanted some answers on what Justin Trudeau was planning to do with 800 people. Where were they going to go? For how long? How much was this going to cost? What was the government's plan to pay for this? And how many more people should Ontario, Quebec, other places in the country expect as a result of this major policy change, this permanence of the Roxham Road border crossing situation? I want you to watch what happened when I questioned his new minister. Justin Trudeau appointed a new minister who, as we found out in these meetings, doesn't have a single government department. Nobody report into him. No power to do anything. But this is a guy who's supposed to be in charge. Watch what he said to me when I asked him these basic questions.
Where are those
in public
800
safety
people going
and
to
with
go?
municipal officials in the City of Toronto.
Where are those 800 people going to go?
I'm aware that plans have already been made to move those individuals into quite appropriate housing in hotels around the GTA.
For how long will they be staying in hotels?
Well, that really depends on their integration into the community and the processes that are currently underway.
How long do you anticipate that they will stay in hotels?
Well, again, we see a transition of those individuals out, and I think the situation is being very effectively
people in
managed.
hotels?
I'd refer to senior officials on the actual cost
Do you think that it's
of managing
reasonable
that.
to house 800 people in hotels?
I
Do you think it's reasonable to house 800 people in hotels?
I think
who have illegally crossed the border
it's
into
reasonable
Canada?
to make sure that people have adequate shelter as they work through the due process that is required
Would you
in their
characterize a
review
hotel
for
as-
their refugee
Just,
claim.
Ms. Rempel, out of respect for the interpreters, they're very difficult for them to interpret in our two official languages if they're speaking over. So
Thank you,
if there could be
Mr. Chair. Minister Blair, would you characterize housing someone in a hotel for an indeterminate period as adequate housing?
They're undergoing due process and the review of their claim of for asylum, and in that period, I think this is an appropriate way to ensure that they are adequately housed and in a safe and helpful environment. It is a contingency while they go work through those processes. And in my opinion, it is appropriate.
I'll ask your officials then to table with the committee the total projected cost for housing people who have illegally crossed the border into Canada from the United States and subsequently claimed asylum for the next 5 years. Yes?
Yes, noted.
Thank you.
So Trudeau's Minister of Nothing, Bill Blair, who's supposed to be in charge of this, had absolutely no answers. He came to committee with this brand new shiny title, no data, no compassion, outside of, I think we're going to put some people in hotels. Now, next up on the grilling list was one of Trudeau's other minions who has a sort of a junior appointment. He's parliamentary secretary to the housing minister, or the minister who's in charge of housing and social programs. I thought maybe he would have some answers about this. Watch what he had to say.
My questions will relate to the system that has been put in place to bus people who have crossed at Roxham Road and claimed asylum. This is the system that the government is referring to as the triage system. So earlier in testimony today, we've heard that the government does not want to close the loophole in the Safe Third Country Agreement. And then we've had my colleague use the word the new normal in terms of the particular situation that is happening at Roxham Road. So my question relates to the budgetary efficacy and efficacy of the government's system. How many people is the government projecting will cross at Roxham Road for the remainder of 2018 and then into 2019 that will subsequently be bused and require temporary shelter?
So I will refer those questions to the departments that manage those questions so you can get specific answers to it. And the answer, and the new normal I referred to was displacement of population, not the situation at the border.
I'm assuming you are here in your capacity as parliamentary secretary because you're supposed to be talking about the efficacy of your, quote, triage system, yet you cannot tell us how many people you are expecting to have to triage in the next year. Is that correct?
Well, what was seen is that numbers crossing the border at that particular point has dropped now to below 40.
Well, actually, year over year,
and as a result
from
of that,
June of last year
the
to
number
June
is
of
fluctuating
this year,
and thankfully getting smaller.
It's increased year over year. So the graph is going like that.
Factually, that's incorrect.
So you can't tell us how many people are going to cross the border. So how can you project how many hotel rooms will be needed?
That is the challenge of having an emergency shelter system, which is at beyond surge capacity.
But you've said it's the
and
new
so the new normal
normal.
requires us not to operate shelters at 90% capacity in normal times because the new normal is displaced populations.
Are going to be required over the next year? Because you've said that there will be more installment payments to provinces, and these installments are not part of the budgetary processes. And parliamentarians, our role is to question government expenditures and their efficacy. So how many more hotel spots are you estimating will be required, and over what time period?
So currently the City of Toronto's homeless population and shelter population is currently...
I'll clarify. Specifically
currently
for people crossing at Roxham Road.
I'll give you an explanation. Currently the shelter capacity in the City of Toronto stands at about 6,400 people, half of whom are children. That number has been holding steady at about 5,000 over the last 7 years. The way to create shelter capacity.
I have limited
the
time.
way to create shelter capacity in the system is to get those people out of the shelter system into permanent housing. That's the $40 billion national housing strategy. And then you have a set budget at the City of Toronto to deal with emergency housing.
I understand you're trying to talk the clock. That's fine, but we're not getting the numbers that we need here.
I was just giving you the numbers.
So the reality is that your government is coming out and making announcement on funding with no numbers attached to it. How many people, for how long? We can't assess, even though I might not agree with my colleague here on how, we need to be able to assess if this is the best and most compassionate way to deal with people who are entering this country at Roxham Road, now that, as you've said, this is the new normal.
That's not what I said.
So,
what I said was displacement of populations inside Canada is the new normal.
To my colleague's point, if you've come to this meeting without these figures, then I don't understand why you're here.
But you'd have to stop asking the question for me to answer.
I would ask, given the amount of commentary that was colorful that you had around the provincial government, who has been in office for 2 weeks, are you planning to run for the leadership of the Ontario Liberal Party?
The answer to the question that I think you're trying to ask is how do we get to a system whereby the emergency housing system, which is the most expensive and least humane way to deal with any individual, let alone their immigration status, how do we move from that into a more robust housing program?
I'm trying to understand how
that
long
will save cities money, provinces money, but more importantly, it'll save people's lives.
Hotels for how long, and how much it's going to cost the
average stay in the hotel.
Taxpayer. And to my colleague's question, if this is the best way to deal with people that are coming into the country this way, and whether or not Canada has the capacity to successfully integrate the amount of people that you have allowed to come into this country by failing to close
is that the system will be sustained as overwhelmed going forward.
We are sitting here in the middle of the summer for meetings, and you have provided no context, no answers, and no statistics for us. You are going to be coming out, and you said you're going to have more installment payments, and parliamentarians here outside of the budgetary process have less information than we did before. Your Prime Minister hired a minister who doesn't even know what his job is. Are you reporting into him?
I report to the Minister of Social Development, and the question you've asked us about statistics. The question you've asked us about statistics, and what I'm telling.
Order.
This is the second time that our colleague has wavered from the focus of the meeting. You know, Mr. Blair's job is not really relevant
to the
here.
agenda of the
Neither is the
meeting.
Ontario Liberal Party.
Actually, because point of order, response on the point of order outside of my time. The Prime Minister has appointed a minister to be in charge of this issue. And this morning, Mr. Chair, he said, I don't know what my job is. Then we have a parliamentary secretary who's sitting here says, I don't know how many people are coming in. You'd have to ask the Department of Immigration. This morning, the minister said, the CBSA and the RCMP don't report into me. What we're seeing here is completely relevant to the issue at hand, there's no plan from this government to manage the situation. There is no plan that parliamentarians can look at the adequacy of whether or not these budgetary expenses are adequate, if they're compassionate, and on what projections they're being made on. That is the data we were trying to get here today, and we've had minister after parliamentary secretary come woefully underprepared to provide this data to the committee. It is in scope, and I will continue these questions.
Thank you. Please continue.
Thank you. Mr. Vaughan, how many people do you project will need housing after crossing Roxham Road for the next 18 months?
What we're seeing is a decline in the numbers, and therefore we believe and hope that
10,
that situation, the
20,
situation
That is
peaked, which means
the end of the time. We now
15,000.
go to Mr.
No answers there either. How irresponsible is that? Okay, so the clip I'm about to show you now is Justin Trudeau's Minister of Nothing, Bill Blair, coming back to committee after I had been sitting there. We had had probably 6 hours of meetings, and he came back at the end of the day. So he had had 6 hours to prepare, knowing watching me, knowing what questions I'd been asking all day, knowing the purpose of this committee study was to get these answers. I'm going to show you a clip in a moment, but I want you to know something else. Because we have, my party, myself, we've been able to get no answers out of this government on this issue. We actually made a formal request to somebody called the Parliamentary Budget Officer. And this position, this office is designed to help get answers for parliamentarians, specifically on budgetary measures. So my colleague Larry Maguire, he's an MP from Manitoba, him and his office came up with a request to the Parliamentary Budget Officer, or the PBO, a couple of months ago. The government was supposed to have, the Liberals, the Minister of Nothing, was supposed to have all of this information ready for the PBO this week, which we still haven't seen, by the way. Now they're sitting in front of a committee meeting, being asked the same questions, and you're not even getting any answers. So here's the clip. Here's the clip. At the end of the day, of the Minister of Nothing, after he's had 6 hours of this, here's what he had to say when I asked him the same questions.
Relationships that they have
Thank you.
already established.
This morning, Minister Blair, or the parliamentary secretary to ESDC, suggested that the, quote, triage system was designed to, quote, redistribute the problem. How many people will be redistributed from Quebec after entering at Roxham Road to Ontario shelters in the next 18 months?
I can tell you that my understanding of the triage system is to ensure that refugee claimants during
many
the period
people would be
have the
triaged?
opportunity to be placed in a place where they are most likely to be successful, a safe place, and so that the burden
Minister
that
Blair,
it may
how many
impact
people
on
will be
communities.
triaged? Because your parliamentary secretary also said that further installments were going to be allocated. He couldn't tell us how much or how many because he said that immigration was in charge there, but now you're in charge. And your counterpart sitting beside you has rightly noted that parliamentarians have the right to scrutinize expenses. So we have found out today that there are going to be future installments, but we don't know for how many people or for what purpose or under what circumstances. How many people are you planning to house in hotels over the next 18 months who have crossed at Roxham Road?
Well, and Mr. Chair, if I may, I'd like to refer that question to the officials who would have a far more accurate answer.
Chair, the triage concept that we're currently designing would see us triage 100% of the arrivals.
How many?
100% of
How
the
many?
arrivals.
How many quantifiably, precisely, how many people are you planning to put in hotels after they've crossed a Roxham Road in the next 18 months?
Sorry, I was answering the first question.
The question was, how could we know this? We need to have a plan at this point in time. You've got 800 people that are about to be moved out of shelters to parts unknown. You need to know. You have made a policy decision not to close the loophole in the Safe Third Country Agreement, and we need to know if you are adequately budgeting for the integration. The entire pillar that you've outlined here on working with the provinces talks nothing about the long-term integration costs of people who are humanitarian immigrants, and you've forgotten the opposite side of the coin. You've forgotten that it's not just about processing them at Roxham Road or taking a picture with them. You have to figure out how you're going to pay for their needs. So, Minister Blair, how many people are you anticipating that you will have to put in a hotel in the next 18 months?
Mr. Hussain?
Mr. Chair, the plan that we have in place is not a new plan. It's been in place
How many people are you planning to put in a hotel, Minister?
Mr. Chair, if I may be
No,
able to
I need to
actually
know
give
this.
an
We have
answer.
gone through hours of meetings with you, and I still don't understand how many people are coming through and how you're planning to
Just
pay
to
for
remind
them.
the member that a question is normally placed through the chair, and if you'd like to do that, that would be helpful.
Point of order, Mr. Chair, on decorum. You raised the right of the minister to answer questions or not. This is the umpteenth committee meeting that we have had. We have 800 people that are about to be evicted from a shelter or college dormitories in Ontario. And I've had 3 ministers plus a new minister who doesn't know what his job is, countless department officials, supplementary estimates, the budgetary process, committee of the whole, order paper questions, and we still don't know how many people they are projecting to come in and how they are budgeting for these expenses. And that is not compassionate because we are in situations where they're having to, outside of the supplementary estimate process, piecemeal money to put people in hotels. We're not talking about how we're going to put together an integration plan for language training. I am just, at this point in time, on decorum, I cannot believe that we have ministers in front of this committee again with no numbers on projections, and they have to have this to the parliamentary budget officer by Thursday. So I'll ask my question again.
I'm just going to say that this is not a point of order. It moved into debate. Is there a point of order over here?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to...
I don't believe it was a point of order. I believe it was continued debate. Ms. Rempel?
Minister Blair. Minister Blair.
Response to
No, I'm asking a
question there?
question. I will ask you a question. Do you plan to comply with the parliamentary budget
Point of order,
officer's
Mr.
request?
Chair. Mr. Chair, you've already indicated that questions need to be directed through you. And I believe the last intervention indicated that that question was directly asked.
Let me
of
rephrase
Mr. Blair.
that.
So if
Mr. Chair, this is my time, and I will ask a question of the minister. So through you, Mr. Chair, will the minister comply with the parliamentary budget officer's request to provide projections on the amount of people they anticipate coming through the border in the next 18 months by Thursday? And the request is for 5 years. And if that is due on Thursday, why don't they have it here after we approved a $22,000 budget for the study, which the government members are unwilling to provide a report for?
Mr. Chair, I can advise you that this financial data has been compiled, and it will be provided to the parliamentary budget officer in the coming days as required.
Why hasn't this been provided to our committee for review? Why hasn't this been provided to the Ontario provincial government? Why is it secrecy and no plan?
Again, the member asked
If it's been compiled,
information is
will the
being
minister
provided to the
table it to
PBO,
committee by the
and
end of the
answer
day?
is
Thank you,
yes.
Ms. Rempel. Thank you, Minister.
So unfortunately, even though the Liberals spent $22,000 on trotting their ministers in front of this committee, we have no more answers for you. But that doesn't mean we're not going to keep pushing. This summer, I'm going to be working to make sure that the parliamentary budget officer, that study that I mentioned, actually happens. I want to scrutinize some of those numbers, and I'm going to be keep bringing these updates to you. And this is where your role is really important. Did you see how the Liberals try to shut me down with points of order every time I tried to ask a question or had those guys on the ropes? That's because they have no plan and no intention of developing a plan. They're hoping that this issue just goes away for them over the summer, and that's not compassionate and it's not fair. It's not fair to anybody, to newcomers to Canada or to you, the Canadian taxpayer. So I need you to share this video. I need you to talk to your friends about how woefully inadequate Justin Trudeau has been on the whole issue of immigration. And I need you to tell me what you think in the comments below. We're going to keep working hard for you, myself, my party, pushing on this issue. I'm still here in Ottawa trying to get some answers, but I'm working hard for you. Share this video. Have a great day.